Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Modern Day Debate. Tonight, we're going to be debating creationism on trial, and Luke is here to present his opening argument. So 10 minutes on the floor, Luke, and it's all yours.
All right, can you guys hear me well?
We certainly
Yep.
can.
Okay, awesome. Let's get after it. All right, welcome to Creationism on Trial, guys. Thank you for having me here. Thank you to the hosting, the interlocutor, the whole shebang, the audience. I will be using terms creationism and intelligent design being essentially synonymous since they are. If a belief is a platform, each piece of supporting evidence or reason-based argumentation is a leg supporting that belief or that platform. I'll offer several legs, which I will be focusing on tonight. Atheists love asking specific questions about specific gods or their morality or verses in the Bible and how they apply to science. And that's all good. Those are fine conversations. But foundational questions must be addressed first. Where are we in space? In space-time, base reality, simulation theory, brain in a vat? How do we know anything? Random chance and time yielding predetermined natural actions versus purposeful design, a conscious self, and free will? Are there moral absolutes? And if so, how do we justify them? Arguing about anything else is like arguing over the existence of symptoms without first testing for the disease. We have to establish these foundational topics first. For several of the legs of my argument, we will need to answer the premise behind the questions about intelligent design, addressing the framing first, kind of like the popular question, have you stopped beating your wife yet? If you answer yes, then you admit that you are beating your wife, or that you used to beat your wife. If you say no, you admit that you are still actively beating your wife. In a question like this, you must address the framing first. In doing so, we will find that often atheists use tools to disprove theism, which they have no logically grounded reason to use. They pretend we are in a designed reality in order to discredit a designed reality. The first leg we'll be looking at is fine-tuning. There are too many factors that are simultaneously perfect for life to exist for chance to be an explanation. The moon's distance from and rotation speed of the Earth, not causing floods, the Earth's distance from the sun, not causing unlivable heat or deep freeze, the makeup of the atmosphere and decay rate of various elements. You could list hundreds of factors which had to simultaneously be perfect, or else not even cellular life could exist on Earth. Dr. J. Richards points this out, as do many, including atheists who recognize the strength of the fine-tuning approach like Hitchens, Dawkins, and Sam Harris, who recognize how both the existence of nothing and the existence of something both seem to have been designed in a compelling manner. And they also recognize the strength of simulation theory, which is ultimately the belief in a design, respectively. Next leg is morality and free will and the fact that they exist. If free will exists, it necessitates God, as atheist Alex O'Connor grants. Free will needs an ultimate source of will, which grants our brains and our very being an aboutness, which is beyond what could be called physical, natural nerve synapses firing. If free will does not exist, laws and punishments are both unethical. If we are acting on natural impulses given our surroundings, we ought to, at the very least, prosecute friends and coworkers of criminals because they contributed to the natural occurrences which ultimately resulted in crime and the environment which resulted in that crime. Morality exists. Good must be grounded somewhere, or else we cannot make statements like grape is always wrong. Here, atheist T-Jump agrees with me, but neither he nor my opponent tonight can define where the moral grounding is. Sunday agrees with these points on morality and free will, even though I suspect he might act as though he does not. In a video which sees Destiny react to President Sunday, Sunday discusses whether or not it is wrong to be a grifter and receive money for things you do. In that same debate, they also discuss whether or not it is right or wrong or justified in multiple factors surrounding the Kyle Rittenhouse case. These types of conversations make no sense without an absolute moral grounding. If you keep tracing this chord, it brings you to the belief that some extremist atheists hold, though very few, which is that intentions and mental experiences do not exist at all. They say this because, in being intellectually consistent and honest, they recognize that intention and experience of the self requires an aboutness beyond neurons firing in your brain. Bringing the parts of your self-consciousness together, emotions, thoughts, experiences, etc., within what may be called a self, a self seems to dictate another conscious being. Philosophy and metaphysical expert Rasmussen and atheist Alex O'Connor agree on this point. The next leg we'll look at is that time, space, matter, and energy require a source outside and beyond themselves. The cosmological argument is that everything that comes into being or begins to exist has a cause. Why is the universe even here? Is being a property of the universe, like having three sides is a property of the triangle? We have no evidence for this regarding the universe. Atheists love to push time back further and space and matter smaller, but they cannot answer where they came from. A note on this leg is that God as an answer is not special pleading. The Christian claim and other religions which says that God is beyond space, time, matter, and the source of energy, long predate the scientific need for such a claim. That is to say, the belief existed before the need was established, and thus it is not special pleading. Two other problems with this being special pleading. One is that all too often, atheists themselves special plead when they say of matter, space, time, and energy that at some level, those things must be eternal. Second, saying that God is special pleading as an answer shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how theists define God. It's like asking, so the North Pole is north? Then what's north of the North Pole? It shows that you fundamentally misunderstand the thing that you're asking about. Real quick, where are we on time? Like 5 minutes? I've got here.
You finish. I yield whatever time he needs.
You got
Okay.
4 minutes and
Finish up.
30 seconds left there.
Oh God.
The next leg I'd like to look at is the existence of non-physical realities like logic and consciousness. This is how we would search, reason, measure evidence for, and understanding of a god or gods. Such realities have no grounding in a random physical universe. Even if they did, we would have no reason to trust our own ability to test these realities. Why would we trust your brain, the naturalistically predetermined result of random time and space? And if my brain disagrees with your brain, why should we even look for a reason to trust one over the other? What is the general atheist answer to this? Sadly, in my experience, it's sneaky coping, misrepresentations, and goalpost moving, as can be seen in my debate recap of my video with T-Jump, in which he was either misinformed or deceitful about whether or not science has disproven free will and the existence of something out of nothing. Spoiler alert, science has not explained these things. I encourage you to view that video if you want full citations. In the various views of quantum theory, none have ever claimed to definitively explain origins, and in various fMRI studies, the scientists involved have gone out of their way to say that free will has neither been explained nor disproven. Professors Pearson, Haynes, and others attest to this. Atheists tend to appeal to science of the gaps coupled with undefined, non-existent standards for proving or disproving God. The problem with science of the gaps is that God didn't get smaller as our knowledge grew. As fine-tuning addresses, God got bigger and more necessary with the more we learned. It used to be that God was only needed to explain lightning, sexual attraction, floods, and some other natural dangers and phenomena. Now, he is needed for every life-permitting constant we discover, and there are many. With that, I'll pose one question, and what do I have, like a minute 30 left?
Yes.
Do whatever you need.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll pose one question I'd love to explore and have answered and we could return to. And I encourage the audience and my interlocutor to think on this one. Would it be wrong for a first world nation, an advanced first world nation, to invade, take the resources, and enslave or kill all the inhabitants of a less developed third world nation, say? Would that be right or wrong? In an evolutionary minded atheistic mindset, there would not be anything wrong with that. And to say that there would be something right about that might also be misleading because right and wrong wouldn't truly exist. However, as we see in Darwin's work and the work which followed.
And the Old Testament.
Sure, we can get into that.
I still got 15 seconds and then we'll kick it over.
Basically, I'll just wrap it up is in saying that in Darwin's work.
I think he deserves an extra 3 minutes for that interruption. I apologize.
We would see that the survival of the fittest dictates that those who are the most fit would, and to an extent should, though not in a moral sense, be used to procreate and further their species. So again, what would be wrong with a first world nation invading, taking over, and stealing from a third world nation under a Darwinian atheistic mindset?
Right,
that's the question I'd love to dive into, and let's get into it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your introductory statement there, Luke. We are going to hand the floor over to you, President Sunday, to respond to some of the things you just heard there. You do have up to 10 minutes, and you are welcome to yield whenever you feel like it and put this into the open discussion. But I will remind our audience that we are going to do Q&A at the end. So if you have questions for either of our speakers, you can get them in now, and they'll be asked nice and early. So President Sunday, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. So first off, my apologies to my interlocutor. I did not remember a single word of that, so you'll have to remind me when we get into the back and forth. But secondly, before I get into my Open statement proper. I want to take the opportunity to express some long-standing issue I've had towards James, the owner of Modern Day Debate, and our host. Not this host, this guy's cool, but James himself, who I was told insisted during the organization phase that he only wanted a debate between atheists and theists, virtually guaranteeing that rather than an interesting exchange between diverse approaches to socially important topics that are very dear to many people's hearts and their decisions in the real world, we are treated to endless repetitions of the same debate again and again between the same self-selecting stereotypes, with one of these roles more often than not, as
All
indicated
right.
by my interlocutor, being played by T-Jump. This is why so
Don't
much of modern
don't
day
make me spend all
debates
the debate doing
content is not
cleanup.
only extremely irresponsible, giving a megaphone to racists, misogynists, and crackpots of all stripes, but also extremely boring, never evolving beyond a repeat of the same old talking points and
All
making
right.
it an
I'm gonna have to ask you to actually get into an introduction against creationism. I can't just do cleanup for the channel and how you feel about how things might unfold on modern day debate. Even though some things we may agree or disagree about, I do have to ask you to present a case that's directed to the thing we're talking about tonight. So I'm just gonna ask you to come off the mute there and. Let's get into the creationism versus an atheistic argument here.
totally fair. By the way, your audio is echoing a little bit.
Ooh.
Yeah, so very quickly. So this is why those debates are also extremely boring, never evolving beyond a repeat of the same old talking points and making it an increasingly unwatchable channel. I urge James to do some soul searching about the state to which his channel has descended, which is essentially a freak show on repeat. Thank you. Now, to address the poor bastard I'm actually debating. There are a lot of arguments for and against the creation of the world by a Christian-style God, and they run the gamut from biology to physics, most of which being well outside my wheelhouse. But many I nonetheless find things within them to worry about in terms of their coherence or trustworthiness. I'm going to spend my opening statement, what's left of it, targeting an argument that isn't completely outside my abilities, namely God's personhood, just to give a taste of the kind of issues that I tend to take with arguments for a creator God. We'll frequently hear theists argue that God is personal. And the reason this matters is to account for a seeming contradiction pointed out by skeptics between the claim that God is responsible for creating the universe, including space and time, with other properties God is asserted to possess, namely his perfection and his timelessness. Being perfect, the skeptic asks, why would God be motivated to create? And being timeless, when would he do so? And God's personhood is invoked to address each of these. God's character is such that he would tend to create worlds such as ours, thus making the creation of the world and of time not at odds with God's perfection, but rather its consummation, solving the first question of why God would create and making the when question seemingly irrelevant, since the creation of time itself on this view has become a necessary part of God's perfection. Problem arises, however, when we consider that second question of when more closely, because it seems like in the very invocation of God's personhood, we have reinserted time into the creation account prior to itself, namely in this respect. If God is capable of occupying multiple different states, and we know that he is, because God at one point must have initiated his creation and then at a later point observed his creation was completed. God therefore appears to be capable of change. Doesn't have to be the kind of radical personality change we associate with a traumatic brain injury or psychological trauma or some other kind of mind-altering experience, but it's nonetheless relevant that God on this account seems to be capable in advance of time existing, of time existing. He's capable of switching between modes, of not creating and then creating. And when we ask along what dimension does a change of states, we can simplify our language here and just ask along what dimension any sort of action can occur, we find it will be time. And so we appear to have engaged in a subtly circular argument when we say that God created the world and is outside of time despite his perfection due to his being a personal being, because we appear to have quietly reinserted time prior to its creation in order to justify assertions about the tendency of a being to specific actions at a point in the story where the conditions of these actions being possible has not yet been satisfied. That's just sort of the type of issue I'm going to take with the kinds of arguments I suspect my opponent is going to bring to bear. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time.
All right, awesome. Let's get into it. And once again, I'm going to remind everybody to hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already. And let's go into an open discussion. So, Luke, I'll put it back over to you to respond to some of what you just heard, and feel free to jump in as you see fit.
Sure. I'll take the first 15 minutes here to say I think modern day debate's got some real issues. I'm just kidding, guys. No.
I was just saying, mute. No, I'm kidding. All right.
This was a theme between the two of us to just come on here and trash MDD. No, there were some interesting notes there. I kind of see a lot of dancing around issues without defined measures of logic, right, wrong, anything that we would use to make a decision, whether moral or scientific or logical. But I just come back to the first question. So I mean, I established what I would consider the for tonight, the support beams for my argument, for the platform of my argument. And my question is one of those is the existence of things like morality, of absolute morality. And so for that, I'd come back to the question I posed. And if you want me to restate it, I can, but that's the one I ended with is the question I'd like to address.
Would it be moral for a greater power to imperially dominate a lesser power?
Well,
Something like
it's
that?
a little bit more pointed than that. So I'd say not just a greater power, but specifically human. So in the modern day, in advanced civilization, let's say Japan.
I meant power in the human sense.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So let's say an advanced civilization like Japan, which under a Darwinian construct is the more fit, the more advanced, and you could even say the more evolved structure than some lesser developed regions or cultures. Would it be bad or wrong for them to kill, enslave, and take the resources for the betterment of humanity? Because you could argue that if there are cultures today that live as cavemen. I would assume we agree, right? There are still cultures that essentially live in the Stone Age or the Bronze Age. They are not using their resources. Again, I don't believe this, but in a Darwinian construct, to the same effect and efficiency that someone like Japan, a first world, advanced, highly productive human structure would. So would it be wrong to invade, enslave, kill, and take their resources for the betterment of the utilitarian construct? That's my question.
For the utilitarian construct, I don't believe I've asserted a utilitarian construct. I also think that last addendum's a little bit unnecessary. I think we can probably tell a similar story in any case where one party finds itself weaker than another one in material terms. I suppose my immediate question is, because as far as I am aware, I haven't actually asserted any particular moral framework whatsoever, and I have no trouble biting a bullet of a greater power doesn't have some supernatural or overarching authority to judge it wrong or right in sort of absolute terms with respect to whatever it does. I'm a little bit perplexed as to what this question is supposed to do for your side of the argument here.
Well, I just find that in the opening, and to be fair, you said you didn't remember it, so we could go back to it. But it would be the second leg that I spoke about, which is that free will and morality exist, and that they both point to a creator or creators. And again, just to define this a little bit, you mentioned a Christian style God. I am a Christian, but tonight I'm not arguing for a Christian style God. I'm arguing for a creator or creators. The debate is intelligent design or creationism on trial. So I'm not sure what you meant by Christian style God, but just
a Christian style God is essentially what's meant by a creator God. That's a set of religious creeds that involve displacing God from the world, making him in some sense prior to its existence, et cetera, et cetera. That's a pretty specifically Judeo-Christian Islamic sort of style of approach to God. Very, very, very few other beliefs, I'm not actually really aware of any, make that specific metaphysical distinction between the world and God himself.
Yeah, so that's an interesting note there. So I would agree that that is a specific style of God. I just wasn't sure what you meant by Christian style, but that's clear now. But I would say that the reason that I would be arguing for that style of God or gods is because that is what is necessary for the inception of the universe, for the creation of the universe. Because take a god like Zeus, right? Zeus is he's an Olympian, which came from the primordials, he's just
the guy. He's a guy with superpowers. Yeah, he's just a guy.
Right? He's essentially Superman. He is dependent on time. He's dependent on matter. He is subject to aging. He is subject to energy resources. He runs out of energy. He would not be a sufficient answer to the questions that we're raising tonight, which is ultimately origins, right? Origins of the universe, and then everything that goes into that: time, space, matter, energy.
Yeah.
So Zeus and those like him shouldn't be supposed as an answer to these things, because they wouldn't make sense. They're not sufficient, right? So would we agree on that?
Well, I want to poke at a little something you said earlier. God would be required for the inception of the universe. Why do you think so? Tell me that.
Well, I think that was outlined in my opening. I think I would shift.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was a lot in your opening. I did not follow it. If you'll humor me. My apologies. Very rude.
So for one of the legs that I think would most directly speak to this is the idea that time, space, matter, and energy require a source outside or beyond themselves.
Oh, certainly, but why would that necessarily take the form of God?
Well, what form do you think it could take that is not God?
I'm in the dark about that. I have no idea. In fact, just to show my hand a little bit here,
Mhm.
I rather suspect that if an explanation of what comes outside of the universe, what is prior to the universe, relies upon its coherence within it, that would actually suggest something of sort of a reverse chain, right? It seems like we're actually projecting something that's reasonable to us, given the parameters of existence that are familiar to beings in the world, outside of it. Like the idea that you can identify something in terms of having like specific properties, in terms of doing things, acting on things. When we're talking about like what creates the world, we're not just talking about what accounts for the existence of stuff. We're also accounting for what accounts for the conditions under which stuff is even conceivable. And it
Yeah.
seems to me that even by sort of enumerating the parts or the activities or the things which God must do outside of the universe in order to satisfy the conditions of creation, we're doing exactly that. We're putting things that only make sense within the context of a universe already existent into a quote unquote space. You see, and like an additional problem here, where these things are being held to have not yet been instantiated.
Like, can you define that additional problem a little more? I'm not sure I recognize it as a problem.
When we conceptualize the world as being distinct between some outside and some inside, we have made a spatial distinction between the
Some
universe as
outside of
such.
what?
Beg your pardon?
You said that when we conceptualize the world as being some outside
Yes.
and some inside, some of what outside of what? What are
When we conceptualize the world as having an inside and an outside, and the outside is presumably zone which God occupies, that's sort of his province, so to speak. We've spatially divided the universe in a certain sense from something that is supposedly prior to space. There's a
okay?
there's a little bit of
The world, you
a
mean
conundrum there for me.
reality. Is that right? When you say when we segment off the world, you mean all of reality, the universe, all of
Oh yeah,
observable.
when you say God is prior to the world, or God
Yeah.
created the world, right? You distinguish between God and the world.
Mhm.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So before we have God and the world, we need something that makes such a division sort of possible. Like we need some bedrock of reality established that allows for division and for the conceptualization of difference, and difference apart from God more specifically. So that's something that makes sense to us. That sort of reflects our experience of objects as they're presented to us in the world. We understand objects by their difference from one another. But when we're talking about the creation of the universe, we're not just talking about the creation of the matter of which differences are comprised. We're talking about the creation of the possibility of difference itself, right? We're going really, really nitty-gritty here. Sometimes I've heard some people argue that the laws of logic, for example, demand God. They're just inexplicable without it, so on and so forth. Well, I throw that right back at you then. Not you specifically. You haven't, I believe, said that tonight. Correct
I
me if
get
I'm
what you
wrong.
mean. The
Yeah,
generic
yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah. So, like, okay, fair enough. But then if you're using uh the fundamental conditions of logic in order to justify God, well, it seems you now have things that are simultaneous with God. You've already introduced a principle that doesn't really get, to the heart of the question, which is why God and why not
So
something else? These two seem to
I think
occupy a similar status with respect to us.
I think the claim there would be twofold. One would be that God is the ultimate measure and source of logic. Whatever God or gods exist would be the ultimate measure and source of logic, without which we could not logically measure anything because there would be no grounding to logic. And the second would be, which would I think most theists would agree with, I could speak for myself and I think many others, is that the existence of those non-physical realities points to God. And I think you said you have an issue with people saying that logic requires God, or was that the word you used, requires or dictates?
Well, what you say is logic points to God. I think
Yes.
what you also said afterwards was that God provides the grounding for logic, otherwise there wouldn't be logic.
Correct.
Maybe we can dig a little bit further into that.
Yeah, and
Why do you think so?
to make this point clear, and then we can go into
Yes.
whatever question you just asked. So when I say points to God or supports in the sense of, as I introduced my opening statement, a leg supporting the structural argument for or of a God or gods. I look at this like puzzle pieces, right? So different pieces of logic, reason, and evidence. There are
Sure.
pieces that can make a puzzle, and that puzzle can look like anything. And so we take these pieces and we say, what does this puzzle, given the pieces we have, look most like? My argument tonight is that that puzzle looks most like it points towards a god or gods that created.
And if I may, how have you made that judgment? How
Well,
have you
with
determined that this is what a pointing to a god looks like?
Yeah, well, I think I addressed that in the opening with the pieces of evidence that we have. I think that they are best explained by a God that is outside of space, time, matter, that is the source of logic and morality, a God that gives us the reality of free will, which we experience, recognize, and exercise
Okay,
regularly.
no, just let's try to stay focused on one thing at a time.
Well,
So we're
no,
going
no, but
really far
well,
afield here.
I understand that, but you asked me, I just gave you the
Oh yeah,
framework.
yeah, but we went
You asked
immediately
me how I
from we went
supported it,
immediately
so
if I may just very
I
quickly
have
we
to at
went
least look
immediately
at
we
things.
went to
Just 1 second there, Luke. We'll let him wrap up his thought, and then we'll kick you back. No,
Go ahead.
that was your floor there,
Oh,
President.
it's my floor.
Well, that's what I say. I was gonna say
Oh, I
you have
thought
the
you were
floor.
giving he was the one who was being interrupted. I thought you were going to give him space. Um,
Well,
me
uh,
too.
just a matter of trying to make sure you're both getting equal time here. So if you got a thought, I want to make sure you're getting
oh sure, but I
equal
mean
time to
opening
talk.
statements I don't think should count for that.
No worries.
Um, yeah, so you were going on and on about how like, and this is what the God is X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera. But I really wanted to get an answer to that specific question. By what methodology, using what tools, did you come to the judgment that the laws of logic uh, points to the existence of God by itself as that which grounds logic, I suppose? How did you make that judgment? How did you get to that conclusion?
I think one way would be by saying that logic needs a grounding. Are we together so far? Logic needs some sort of absolute grounding.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm
And
not I'm not agreeing with that. I'm just following. Sorry, continue.
yeah. All right. Well, if you disagree with it, I think we have an issue. So I'd ask you why you disagree with it. I mean, because I'm giving you my process of my order of operations in my mind. And so I think that if you disagree with one, you have to stop me there and show me why you are justified in disagreeing.
Well, it's that word absolute I'm sort of ambiguous about. You haven't really like defined your terms or really specified what you mean by the words you're using to describe your methodology. I'm just letting you sort of play it out.
Yeah, well, okay, so I said I believe that logic needs an absolute grounding, meaning that there have to be some things that are absolutely correct. Two plus two
Why
has,
why do you think so?
in order for us to know anything or to even execute things like the scientific method or to have interpersonal communication in any meaningful way, that would have to be true.
Well, that's a pragmatic argument for what we need logic to be in order for us to make positive use of it. But I was asking specifically,
Pragmatic
how
argument.
do you know that to be true? That logic requires some sort of fundamental foundation.
Well, why
But
would you?
what do you use to get to that?
Well, I just said it's a pragmatic argument based on observation. Why would you say it doesn't?
Why would I say it doesn't? Well, I'm
Hmm.
sort of in the dark about that. The reason why I'm asking is because
Well,
it
you
seems to
can say
me.
you're in the dark about it, but that's not an answer. That's not you say I haven't defined
Well,
things.
I was gonna give you an answer. So the reason why I was
Okay,
asking
okay.
the reason why I was asking that particular question, um, is because it seemed to me as though you were making statements presuming certain axioms of logic about logic in order to get to some sort of meta statement about God's relationship to logic as a kind of background grounding for it. And I'm a little bit curious as to how you sort of get around that because it seems like you're reasoning in a bit of a circle here. You're starting from the assertion that God grounds logic and then using the conditions under which logic is useful, or under which logic is logic, say, in order to get at something that's behind logic. But it seems to me that you haven't actually done that. You're still operating sort of within the system that you're asserting stands by itself as evidence of something else that is only recognizable by the internal mechanisms of that system. Am I making sense?
a little bit, but I don't think that I think that you might have misrepresented a few steps there, and I don't think that the argument I'm making
Well,
is
by all means, correct me, please.
Sure. So I'm saying logic exists, and in all observable instances ever, logic has been reliable. And that number one, that existence first. Oh, can you guys hear me? Sorry, I just got a low battery.
No, you're totally mute. Can't hear a thing.
Stop. No, we can hear you fine. Your presence
Okay.
just messing with you.
Okay, great. Um, okay, so the existence of a non-physical reality like logic is an example of how we would measure something non-physical like God. I think that is just one conceptual example that we can look to. And then the other piece that logic kind of plays into here is that logic has to be grounded in something. I won't even say someone. It has to be grounded in something. And I'd ask what you think it's grounded in. And the example I gave is if we assume a reality, and I'll say universe, but when I say universe, I don't mean just physical matter. I mean full reality. That is the product of random time and chance. Ultimately, there's no reason to believe that logic is grounded and reliable in such a reality. And I'd be interested in hearing where you might disagree with that and how you justify disagreeing with that.
Well, what does it mean to measure something metaphysical?
To measure
that requires sort of like marking in some sense, some sort of dimension, right? That's what measurement involves. It's comparing like things in order to get a sense of relative scale or duration or whatever. Like that's what measurement entails. What does it mean to measure something metaphysical?
to measure something metaphysical,
Mhm.
I'm not sure that you would put that in the realm of physical measurement, if that's what you're saying. I'm
Well,
saying
metaphysical measurement, if you will. What does that mean?
I'm saying measure in the sense that you would measure the character of a man to assess
Measure
something.
the character. Well, what is measured when you assess the character of a man?
It's using the observable realities that you have
Yeah.
and the formerly observed realities that may not even be connected to that reality that you're currently observing, and compiling them all and making a conclusion. So for instance, if I look at you and
Yes.
then I measure you based on my former experiences with other humans, those aren't tied to you, but they can be tied in the sense that I use them as reference points and comparisons and averages in my mind to measure the person that I'm talking to, in this case, you, even though you're not directly tied to other people and beings that I've observed in the past.
Well, God, would you agree is since we're talking about metaphysics, God is spaceless, timeless, so on and so forth.
I would say that God is outside of and not restricted by space and time.
So God is a spatial being.
He can be, but if he wants to be, because he is all powerful, but he is not restricted by and is outside of space and time.
So God is also finite. That's interesting. It's not a typical Christian
What do you
position.
mean by finite?
Well, you've just delineated a distinction between what is God and what is not God by making him outside of space and time. Yes.
No, I said if he is outside of and in control of it, he can be anywhere at any time. He can be everywhere at any time.
Can be in potentia, but the fact that he's outside of it would represent like a distinction between space, time, and God. So that would be a limit. Yes.
To limit
Space, time are not God.
If God or gods choose to limit, and if God or gods, which are powerful enough to explain origins, choose to not be present in the creation or realities which they created and brought to be, then they can, but that doesn't mean that they are limited in a finite sense. They can choose to withdraw, but that doesn't mean they have to. Limit tends to imply a need. When you say, for instance, when you say, I've reached my limit, there comes a direct implication of a need to rest.
Well, not necessarily. Like the ocean has a limit, right, between the water and the land. Like that's a limit.
Yeah, and it needs to stop there, right? So that
it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to stop there. It does stop there. It doesn't need to.
That would be a bit of a dishonest comparison there.
How so?
I just explained why. Because the ocean needs to stop where it stops. So it is finite. There is a need. It can't go further than the shoreline.
Well, I think what you're talking about is that there's some kind of external imposition that causes it to stay fixed there.
Sure.
That's not the language of
there's
need, though. It doesn't
equal and
need to
opposite
stop there.
force.
When you
You
say
want
need,
it
you typically talk about it like
it is
an
forced to.
appetite that needs to be satisfied or something.
It needs to in the sense that it is forced to, in the sense that it doesn't matter. In the sense that it is forcibly stopped in its progression there. That would not be the same as an infinite God or gods who created, who account for origins.
Okay, so finitude doesn't have anything to do with the power of a being or the potential of a being. Finitude simply has to do with the fact that a thing has some point where its extension ceases, so that if you were to compare it to something else, that thing would go on where that thing doesn't go, or vice versa. So the reason why
I wouldn't agree. I mean, no. So finite means to have limits or bonds on you. That is I literally just looked up.
It can colloquially mean limits or bonds, but when we're talking
Sure,
metaphysics, it really just means like it has an end. Yeah.
So you're kind of and this is I've seen some of your stuff before. You come up with these definitions with a few SAT words and you throw them in there authoritatively, and you're very good. And frankly, I appreciate how respectful you've been. But you have this a little bit of an air of throwing an SAT word with an authoritative definition that you have approved of, and then a simple Google search can show that's not actually the right definition of that word. So the first definition.
I'm going to level with you. It would be loverly if you won this debate and that completely unconvinced me. I think that would give me a lot of peace of mind. I'm not convinced that you're going to, but I'm actually legitimately asking these questions because these are the questions that concern me about this kind of debate.
Not being convinced that you'd win either, but having a limit or a bond is the definition of finite. So I think I'm not gonna let you kind of sneak away.
Well, why don't we just pretend I made up a definition out of hand, and I'm specifically talking about spatial finitude.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Can you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
Why don't we pretend I was erroneous in my, I'm not, by the way, but why don't we pretend I was erroneous in my initial use of finitude, and we'll restrict it to the spatial, because there's a specific reason that I'm asking this, which is pertinent to that.
When you say restrict it to the spatial, what are you talking about?
I mean, when I say finite, I'm specifically talking about a spatial finitude.
I still wouldn't grant that. No, because a god or gods that choose to either that have the ability, the full ability to be present everywhere at once, or to take a physical form and be present in South Africa at that time. That doesn't make them finite.
If God chooses to be outside of space and time, you follow me? If God chooses to be outside of space and time, then what he chooses to do is to make it so his infinity doesn't extend into the domain of space and time. Do we agree with that?
If he chooses to be outside of space and time, yes. However, the god or gods who are capable of accounting for origins don't necessarily.
No, he retains the power to go back in afterwards. Okay, all of this can be reshuffled.
Sure, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, the argument doesn't even have to dictate that they are exclusively outside of space and time. I'm saying they can be outside of and inside of space and time at the same time, but not limited by space and time. So not in space and time in the sense of being finite and limited.
Okay, but you're talking about limited in the sense that you're worried about my attacking God's capacity for infinitude, but I'm not doing that. I'm just literally asking, like, would you agree that if God is outside of space and time, then what we are describing is a relationship of finitude? Being outside, time stops where God starts. By being outside space and time, God stops where time starts, and vice versa. Like, am I making sense? I feel like that's a pretty...
No, I don't think so, because you just said time starts where God stops. That's not the argument.
If we imagine space and time as being this circle, and God as being this circle, and we agree that God is outside of space and time, then the God circle does not overlap with the space and time.
But that's not the argument. So what it would...
I was asking a question. I wasn't making an argument.
Well, but you're making a statement about my belief, and I just think that
I'm literally just asking a question.
So for instance, the argument is more akin to this, which would be, can you even see these? I don't even know. This it's a nasty looking donut. This would be God, except for this would be
Or the
all
best kind of bagel.
limited. And this would be time, space, and matter that he has created, which is within his or their realm, but he or they are not restricted by that thing. So
Sure.
it's not that God existed and then stopped, and then here comes time, space, and matter. It's that God exists, and within his existence, he chose to bring in what we limited beings
Here.
observe as time, space, and matter.
Show
So
me
I,
show me the bagel again. I'll show you what I mean, okay?
yep.
Okay. So put it right up the screen. Just so we have a yeah, thank you.
No. Go ahead.
No, because it's the illustration. I'm talking about the
That's
illustrations
not the
put up.
illustration. It's an O and an O. Go ahead.
Oh, you're making me ruin my whole copy of Foreign Affairs here. Do I have a blankish page? That'll do. Okay. So you got your donut, right?
Mhm.
All right. So as you can see here, there is a line separating the space in this donut from the space within the hole. Okay. So the matter or the substance or whatever you want to call it of the donut is finite with respect to the space occupied by the hole, which is not the hole. Obviously, this is
Not if
the hole with an H, not a W, because
Hmm.
the hole with the W does have an H in it, but you got the idea.
Yeah, I got you. Not if what that hole is within. Think of it more of a sphere than a circle, or in ever expanding eternal sphere, whatever.
Mhm.
That circle within that sphere, this is three-dimensional, would be a better way, but I doubt that either of us could draw it, is part of the whole. It's not a finite limitation. It's not like, hey, here's this circle and the outside circle can't get in or even isn't in. No, it is in. It just
So it's
brought in.
part of the whole. So it's part of God. Yes.
It is within the reality of.
Okay, but it is a part though. You're specifically using that language. You're comfortable with that?
It is. Yeah, sure. You could call it
Okay.
part.
What is a partition?
A part
What
of.
does a partition involve?
A partition is being a part of something bigger.
No. A partition is when you take a part from something and separate it, right?
That's what I said.
I.e.,
Part
so
bigger. Yeah.
the mother part, if you will, now has a relationship of finitude with respect to the space occupied by the partition. This part is not identifiable with this. Okay, that works for me just fine. We cool with that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
There is a relationship of finiteness with respect to the whole and the part, i.e., the main part
Mhm.
ends at the point where the part begins, along
No.
whatever dimension you like.
The part is intrinsically part of the whole.
It doesn't matter if it's
It is
intrinsically part of the whole, it is still part
It
of
is
the whole, yes?
it is a creation out of the essence of the whole, and it is within the whole. It is not
But
partitioned
okay,
off
but within the
from
whole is a
uninhabited
relationship of
space.
spatial difference. Within is a relationship of spatial difference. You have identified a thing that is distinct from the surrounding ambient stuff. And therefore you have a spatial division so that we can say time it does not encompass God, and God encompasses but is not inside space and time. Yes?
No. Not you just said God encompasses, which is around, but is not
Yes.
within space and
But
time.
that's the
He
donut you made.
encompasses it, and he is within it, or they are within it.
So God is within space and time. God is
And
not outside of space and time. So
so
we
not,
disagree.
this is what I literally started out saying, though, is not restricted by. You can be in, but not restricted by.
Okay, but a restriction and a separation are not identical with each other. So, for example, I retain the capacity to enter a movie theater I have technically been gated out of. That is a thing I can do. Just jump over the little rope, right? That's easy. Okay, so I retain the power to put myself into the movie theater, but I am insofar as I'm on one side of the line, I'm on the other side of the line.
Yeah, but that's not fair. No,
So
that's not.
whether or not God retains the ability to manifest in space and time indefinitely,
No,
that does
he
not.
is in space and time.
He is
So
in space and time.
is in it, but is also out of it. This is where I talked about I think this is a ground level misunderstanding between atheists and theists. And I think that this is kind of like you saying, okay, if we look at a light.
Did you listen to that whole thing that our host just muted? Like we're talking about like, oh,
You muted?
what does the general atheist think? First of all, I don't think you know what the general I don't even think I know what the general atheist thinks. But secondly, like it feels like you're arguing with a bunch of
I think you
stereotypes here. I
probably
ask you a
do.
simple question, and
I think you probably.
you're extremely insecure about oh, these are the games those sinister atheists play in order to undermine us because
When did I
they
say
just love
being
gay sex and hate God.
for atheist play?
Just work with me here. Like let's
No. I'm going to press you on that. When did I say or even imply that these are the games sinister atheists play?
Well, you referred to the general atheist multiple times in your discussion. I'm assuming that's not a ranking system within the army of atheism, right?
I never said ranking system. I never even implied
I
that.
know that was a
Yeah,
joke.
but yeah, I think it's absolutely true or it's absolutely fair and accurate to speak to generalities within beliefs. You could speak about general Christian beliefs. Generally, Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Generally, Islamists believe that Muhammad was the unique prophet of prophets.
No, but you were like loading in arguments
No.
I
There's
never
nothing
even made
wrong
with
with
respect to
speaking
like
about
the morality of
if
Japan
if you want to
attacking Nanking or
push
something. Like
back on a
it's not
specific point, you can
sorry.
push back on it. But I reject you saying that speaking in generalities when we're talking about beliefs held by millions is a bad thing. If there's a specific one there that you want to push back on, go
Well,
ahead and.
it's with respect. I think it's bluntly an anti-intellectual thing when we're talking about very high level issues
Mhm.
concerning relationships of space, time, and being to fall back on. And this is what those slovenly, God-hating atheists always do.
When did I say
it
that?
screams not serious to me.
When did I
And
say or allude?
I would just like to have a conversation.
Sure, me too. But you just leveled
I
an
don't believe you.
accusation about something that concerns you. When did I say or allude to that? Can you give me the quote?
Well, just not an accusation, but just the example that you brought up.
Okay, the
Like
observation. Give me the quote.
the whole thing, like we're talking about creation, for example. You're
Mhm.
asking me about whether or not it would be moral for a greater political body to dominate a lesser political body along
Yeah,
some
yeah.
spectrum. Yeah.
Mhm.
But we haven't even gotten to that part of the conversation. You're just gish galloping a million different grievances you have with
Wait. Okay,
like the T
so
jumps of the world, and it's a little bit tiresome.
so I don't think that.
I asked you a
No.
very simple question.
Let
Do
me
we
finish
agree
this.
that there is a
I think
spatial
that
distinction
in
involved in a
a
partition between
10
space and time and God?
a 10-minute opening statement is not a gish gallop. Using a 10-minute opening statement to establish your parameters and beliefs is not a gish gallop. And
Whatever you say, I'm really not invested in
I
that.
reject
But
that accusation. And then
look, I get your feelings are hurt, but I really
Okay,
do actually care about
just
the
one second
no,
question.
there,
it's
President.
not hurt. My
Well, we got to let him at least, get, try to answer the question. And if you don't feel like he's answered it, you can press. But we got to
so
let him have a chance to respond.
well, speaking of pressing, I'm not going to let him get away from this. He just leveled quite a few accusations. I want examples. He just and then when I asked for examples, he hand waved and said, well, when you talked about that thing, and he said, when you talked about the Japanese and the first world nation question, our conversation hadn't even gotten there yet. Excuse me, yes, it had, because I brought it there. I asked that question because it was a piece of the supporting evidence that I wanted addressed, and
Yeah.
you hand waved it away and said, we hadn't even gotten there yet. So I'm going to ask you again, give me a quote or a statement I made that supports the claims that you just made against me about dodging and generalizing and
Dodging
in an
and generalizing.
intellectual, dishonest way. Into
Well,
intellect.
I throw that back right back at you. When have I accused you of dodging or I did accuse you of generalizing, but more I was pointing to but you have generalized. The word general was used specifically by you multiple times.
Yeah, but you
That's a generalization. So
no.
if you're asking me to provide a quote or you generalize, I don't know why, because I think we both agree that you were generalizing about atheists.
My question is, you just made accusations. You made very pointed accusations. I'm asking for a quote with an example.
I asked you why did you bring up the example of a greater power dominating a lesser power, and you specifically referred to this is what atheists generally do. Yes?
When did I say this is what atheists generally do?
I don't
Never
know.
said.
Look at the VOD. Like, what are we doing here?
All
Never
right.
said that.
We are getting just into a spiral about meta discussion, so let's try to get back to the creation on trial discussion rather than, like I say,
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
meta.
So,
Okay. So
sure.
no. So I'll.
So the reason why I was asking all of that
I'll answer that question that he just asked. Why did I bring that up? I brought that up
I think we're
because
moving back to
one of
creation
my
now.
supporting, excuse me?
We're going back to creation stuff now, he just said.
Yeah, so the reason I brought that up is because in my introduction, that is one of the pieces of supporting evidence of that puzzle I told you I'm trying to make in my mind of what does this look like? Does this point towards a creator or creators or not? The fact that morality exists and that there are absolute morals points towards an intentional creator and source of morality. So that was my point. That was the reason I raised that question. So go ahead and engage with it.
Okay, so the obvious, just to wrap up the previous point we were talking about, that was actually germane to the question of creationism. The reason why I was asking about the spatial relationship between God and space and time is precisely because you are relying upon a spatial division in order to describe the relationship between God and space and time, implying that space is at least coeval with God in your analysis, which poses, I think, a number of problems
How
to the
does
point
that
to say that God
imply
is
that?
outside of space and time, because God, therefore, in a being able initially to create something separate from himself, is creating something that is separate along essentially spatial lines. Whether or not you regard space as, for example, vacuum or whatever, is sort of immaterial. A division between two concepts, even in the abstract, is an inherently spatial one. You're describing a entity over here that has X, Y, and Z properties that are not shared by this, and you can draw a line between them. Boom. You already have the prior existence of difference, and therefore something is prior to God. Otherwise, God himself wouldn't be able to, for example, have identity. There must be
Yeah,
some thing that describes the contours of reality such that God as a concept is even conceivable.
so I think you're just misunderstanding whether this is a creation within or a creation without. And I've tried to make it very clear this is a creation within, which exists within and
Oh, that's
depends,
lame. Space aliens could do that.
not a creation without. So you keep trying to make it as though God's over here on this side and he
You
creates
you
a
drew the
world
donut, my dude, not me.
and he creates a world and it's over here on this side. That's not the theist argument. That's never been my argument. So I don't I mean you can repeat that claim all you
I
want,
mean,
but
I mean, you've described the relationship between yourself and a Pop-Tart when it's in your stomach, okay? It's still separate from you spatially, yes?
not if I made that Pop Tart out of my essence and it was always within and reliant on being within me and I was eternal and all present, which is the claim about the origins God or
Do the world
God.
a favor and never describe a Pop-Tart as being made from your essence ever again. So
I,
let's
I
talk about
did.
the morality point.
You're the one who asked a red herring question. So, I mean,
I don't think that was a red herring question. I think that's directly germane to the relationship between God and the foundation of logic.
in
If God can be described by logic, then he's clearly not outside of it because he abides by its terms and can be encompassed in some respect by it. And if he can be discovered by logic, then outside of logic must be a relation that is conceivable within the terms of logic, uh, thereby making God ensconced in a system that goes beyond himself. Like it just doesn't make any sense.
not if he is the source of logic. That if he is the source of logical absolutes, then all of what you just said goes away as
Yeah,
an
but
issue.
how would you determine that something that is outside of logic is
I
the existent source of
I
logic
don't think I don't
without
think I said
deploying that
outside of
same
logic.
logic in order to arrive at that conclusion? And how are you not arguing in a
I don't
circle
think
if you
I
do
ever
so?
said outside of logic. And if I did, that was a misspeak. But I don't think I ever said that. I said he is the
Is God within logic?
absolute of logic.
Is God
Being
outside logic or is God within logic?
the ultimate source of something is not being outside of something.
Not in like a definite sense, but it absolutely does imply that there is, in some respect, a difference between some element of the source and the thing to which it gives rise. Otherwise, they would be coeval with each other. They'd be simultaneous.
The
So my
argument
question to you is God encompassed by logic or is logic outside
because
of God?
logic is part of God, it is because logic is a part of the eternal God or gods who
Careful. Is God an
account
essential? Is
that
logic an
because
essential
of
part of the
that,
eternal
as
God?
a result, it is co-eternal. It's like saying if Luke is eternal
Yes.
and Luke is the source of goodness, then is goodness co-eternal? Yes, that's not a problem. That's not
Don't
a
eat those
problem.
Pop-Tarts, kids.
I think
Um,
you are fundamentally misunderstanding these things, and you're doing your best to define them in terms that help you. But we get to a point where I just say, yes, that's what theists believe. And
okay,
you go,
so God has logic as an essential part of his being.
No. How about this? Okay, so
Yes.
I've just interacted with and answered two of your questions in a row. I'd like you to come back and answer mine,
Well, I'd
which
actually like clarification on that statement you made that didn't actually come equipped with an argument. You just gave a description.
I'd
So
like
you
to.
said that you said that logic is a part of God. Can you elaborate?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
You just said that logic was a part of God. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate?
Yeah. So the argument is that God is the source, the ultimate grounding of
Sure.
logic, in the
Yes.
same way that you might say, if in the example I just gave, if someone were to believe, or if it were true, that I am the ultimate good and the source of goodness itself, goodness could be called a part of me. And all goodness that flows out of me would not be separate from me. It would actually be because of me. And so you can't say, well, but then goodness would be co-eternal with Luke. That's a problem. That's not a problem. That's the argument. That's the understanding. You might disagree with that argument and that understanding, but that's not a problem. And
Well,
logic.
a relation of out of, even if we represent it with a gradient, we'll have one end that doesn't have the property of being logic, and the other end that will have the property of being logic. And so there will be a distinction within God between that part of God which is logic, that part of God which is not, right? Because even if it's a smooth transition, which comes a little bit of logic, more logic, then we have full-fledged logic, or the laws of the universe, or whatever you want from that. Like there's still going to be a part that from which logic is emergent. Otherwise, God would be identical with logic if they were all just the same thing across the board. Yes, that's how identity works.
If if he is the source of logic of anything,
Yes,
then in a sense
but logic is not the source of God.
he is not limited to that identity, but that is ident. So in the same sense, and again, if I am the source of goodness, I am identical to goodness. That doesn't mean that goodness is all I am, or that I am limited to just being goodness. But if
Yes.
I am the ultimate source of goodness, then yes, goodness, or in this case, the source of logic is it is the identity. It is a part of that. Again, I'll use a word you didn't like, essence. It is an essence
I
of
never
that.
said I didn't. I don't dislike the word essence. I dislike the idea of a pop tart being filled with your essence. What I was talking about previously though is so there is a distinction then between the part of God that gives rise to logic or that justifies logic or whatever. Like there's a part of God that is not identifiable with logic. Yes, even if they're coeval, there's a part of God that isn't identifiable with logic. God gives rise to logic. For God to give rise to logic, there must be God on this side, logic on the other side. Doesn't matter if they blend together. You look on this side, there's God. On this side, there's logic, right?
No,
Then
no.
what does it
Well,
mean for something to give rise
if
to?
he is the source of logic, why would they be separate like that? Can you justify that?
Well, because you've described God as the source, and logic is not the source of God.
Okay, so that's just a semantic. So if he is the
That's not a
source,
semantic. You're using
is
that
the source
specific.
and the essence of the thing, then why does that thing have to be separate from? He is the definition of
Because
that.
they're asymmetrical. Because you would not say that logic is the source and the essence of God, would you? Careful.
I would say that logic is grounded in the source and essence of God. Yes.
Exactly. So they're different. One has a subordinate relationship to the other one, yes?
It has
Logic is subordinate to God in some respect. God encompasses logic. Logic does not encompass God. We're in agreement there?
logic is God. It is it is what he is, not limited to, but he is the source of that thing ultimately. It's not like you would cut out, say, okay, so let's say that logic resides in his left arm, cut that out, and now God no longer has logic, and all we have of
All right.
God.
All right. Look, just work with me.
No,
So if God is not, no, just please. If God is not limited to logic, then there is a part of God that is not within the domain of logic, right?
No,
Because God's not limited to logic. If all of God was within logic, then God would be limited to logic.
no,
That'd be
everything he
okay.
does, everything, this is where the word essence comes in. Everything that God or gods of origins have, are, and represent is logic, is logical. It is not all that it is, but it's like saying, again, if I am that source of goodness, everything I am going to do and represent is going to be part of that goodness. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing that I absolutely am. I
Okay,
can
so what other than that thing that is not the only thing that you absolutely are could that be?
What do you mean?
When you my my hair is quote unquote me,
Okay, yeah.
but
So
I am
so
not only my hair, thank God. Yes?
so if you are the source of goodness, everything that you do and are and represent is fundamentally good. But it doesn't have to only be good. It can be good and logical and wise if you are the source of those things as well. So it follows that as the source of the essence of that thing, everything you do carries that essence with it, but it
Sure.
can also carry other things that you are also the source of.
I
I don't see
understand,
that.
but the point is, logic is a different part of God from his goodness and from these other properties, which you have distinguished from each other. Yes?
It is a different category of his
Good.
natures. Yeah,
Yes, different category of his nature. All right. So within God, there are categorical distinctions.
that we use to understand. Yeah.
That's cheating, though, because you're using this as a justification for your argument that God created the world. It can't just be that we use to understand God. That presumes that God exists and that we are simply translating him. You need to justify if there's a thing that you are quote unquote measuring in order to make that argument.
No, my argument was to come back to excuse me. Can you guys still hear me?
No.
Um my argument was that this is the existence of something like logic, which we use, measure, observe, and is non-physical, is a piece of the evidences that point toward, and when compiled with the rest of the evidences, paint a very convincing picture of a god or gods that are outside of space-time matter and could account for origins of the universe within a rational mindset. So
I'm
with
sure
that,
I'm sure you think so, but the
so
contradiction,
I
the
want to come
contradiction
back.
that I'm really
So
trying to
let's
highlight
come
here.
to the
All
point
right, just
that I
hold your
raised.
thought there, just present. We'll let you wrap up the last 10.
I've engaged with a lot of points that you've raised. I want to come to the point I raised. So would it be wrong? The question I asked, I doubt I need to repeat it, but if you need me to, I can. Would it be wrong? Just give me a yes or no, and I'd love to explain why yes or no as well.
Depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
I would disapprove of it and I would hate it. Would I say it is absolutely wrong, as in I have the stamp of some universal principle to declare that that action would be wrong? No, of course not.
Why would you disapprove of and hate it?
I like people and I don't like people getting chopped up for abstract notions of nationalism or whatever.
I never said nationalism. I'm
Well, we specified Japan as an example. I'm just telling you why in that particular case. Want to do
yeah.
Israel Palestine? Same deal, I suppose. Want to do how
Why
about
don't you like it? Why don't so if it is a survival of the fittest situation, because let's flesh this out a little bit. When a larger and or healthier lion pride wants what a smaller and or less healthy lion pride has, the males go in, take
yeah,
any fertile female, kill any offspring that isn't their own, and
yeah,
kill rival males that are too old to be brought into their own pride. That is
yeah,
what happens.
yeah.
That's not, I haven't seen anyone, and I certainly don't think that that is bad per se. It's just the way that nature operates. So if
So
we if we are highly evolved products of nature, why do you said hate and disapprove of, I think, or something along those lines? Why do you hate and disapprove of these highly evolved products of nature doing something that is ultimately best for their species? Just like for that lion pride, it is best for them to procreate with the stronger, more numerous, more well-established pride.
All right,
well,
Why?
there is such a thing.
listen to
There is such a
respond and then ask your question you had earlier there. So go ahead.
there is such a thing as perverse effects. So I would take a little bit of issue with the idea that that is necessarily better for the stronger party in any case. But leaving that aside, um, why do I? You may as well be asking a historical question. If you're asking why do I, in the sense of I am elevating my distaste for that kind of thing to the level of a universal principle, I haven't done any such thing. I mean, for someone who's complaining about semantics, that's a little bit of an odd move to make. In answer to your question, there have been a series of cultural developments that have led ultimately to the formation of how my mind works. And I've decided after judgment that I'm comfortable with sitting with some after reflecting on their contingency and so on and so forth, and other ones that I'm not. And that's basically all there is to it. Now, is it the case that it is universally cosmically acceptable or good for a stronger nation to brutalize a weaker one for its own benefit? I'm quite sure I have no idea. Um, but I'm also pretty confident you don't either.
So you can't, with any sense of certainty, say that doing such a thing would be wrong. You would dislike it because of your cultural influences,
What do
but
you mean by wrong?
you couldn't look at it and say,
What do you
hey,
mean by wrong? What do you
that
mean
is
by
wrong.
wrong? What do you mean
I
by
mean,
wrong?
it is morally wrong to do.
Okay,
It
what do
is
you
a
mean by
bad
what do you mean
thing to
by
do.
what do you mean by morally wrong to do?
It is something that should not be permitted because it is in and of itself bad and wrong. Just like
Have you
I
ever had occasion to read Kant's groundwork for the for the is it Foundations of Morals? I can't quite remember. Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, pardon me. I guess that means sort of the same thing. You ever managed to down that? It's a short one.
no.
Okay, so basically the argument that Kant
This
makes,
isn't gonna. This isn't
it
gonna.
actually does come to bear. So the argument that Kant
Okay,
makes when
I
we're
don't want
talking
to
when we're
do
talking
this
about the
one
moral in
second.
this key, we're talking about the moral in this key. This actually does come to bear very strong. I'm not muted, am I? I can still be heard.
No,
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So one of the points that Kant makes is that when we are talking about the moral, qua the moral, um, what we are talking about is that which is an imperative, irrespective of any contingency. So this is one of the reasons why, and this is a like a vastly reduced sort of impoverished version of this, but this is why the continuity of morality often involves sort of a rejection of anything that you personally benefit from, emotionally or materially or whatever. It's actually better if you don't get any enjoyment from the action whatsoever, because then it is more purely a simple imperative and there isn't contingency loading onto it. This can include the human, by the way. So, for example, one of the issues that's really this is actually a very Christian idea of morality. If you're familiar with the idea that you should absolutely not be praying in view of the public, where you have the pleasure of the enjoyment of being observed to be pious by the people around you, and that you should not let your right hand know what your left hand knoweth, or vice versa. I can't remember which one comes first when you're like giving to the poor or something like that, because it's like that line from if you've ever read the Screw Tape Letters. It's like that person who's managed to achieve humility, reflecting upon himself and going, "By Jove, I'm being humble." It's a notion of pride. There's sort of a paradox there. Um, well, when we're talking about the moral, we're talking about that which is a pure imperative, something to which you are oriented, completely absent any interest whatsoever. And so when you're talking about like, what do I feel? I mean, it's distinctly possible a person is raised in an environment in which they regard the immoral things that, like, for example, like maybe if there is a God, they regard the things that God commands as being quote unquote immoral, or having more of that sort of like indefinite gravitational pull towards in terms of a decision, and something that is moral, treating that as bad. I suspect you probably have a similar frustration when you get into abortion arguments with people, where they'll regard like bodily autonomy as an absolute good, and they'll regard any sort of like restriction in favor of the humanness of the fetus or whatever as like an absolute bad or something along those lines. Well, when you're asking me like uh, how can I regard something as being bad or good in the absence of making some deep metaphysical statement? I mean, like we really are just referring to a materially bounded being. You're inquiring as to whether a materially bounded being can make absolute statements that make absolutely no reference to the world. And my answer to that is obviously I can't. But when I'm saying moral, I'm meaning moral in the ancient sense of literally just I am accustomed, or the people around me or my society are accustomed to regarding this thing as a thing you shall not do, and this thing is a thing that you shall do. And it's really that simple. I don't have to go beyond that to justify that before some postulated
Feel free to jump
cosmic
in.
super entity, right? Or and if I do, I'd be curious to see how you how you argue that. I mean, it's a very modest claim to say that I regard something as bad. I'm not saying it's absolutely bad. If you want to say, well, as someone who is agnostic about the existence of God, you can't make definite claims that require the existence of God to make. I mean, sure, if that's something you consider like an advantage to your side, but I, for one, don't consider it an advantage in a philosophical debate, certainly, to say that, well, I can use unproved statements to do things pragmatically. That seems to be against the spirit of philosophy.
I don't know
which
if
I'm
you,
assuming is what you're trying to do.
I don't know if you heard me there earlier, Luke. I did say feel free to jump in at any time here, just because.
I didn't.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I didn't think you heard me because I was gonna say yeah, he had the floor for a while there. So yeah, feel free to take some time to respond.
Sure. I mean, I figured we were maybe just giving him the time for his
Sorry.
opening statement that he didn't get. But I think that was a pretty lengthy non-answer, and there were some good words put in my mouth there, but unfortunately, they were words placed into my mouth. Um, I think that fundamentally what you just said is that you can't say that any atrocities, including those which make sense, like the one I outlined under a Darwinian atheistic perspective, are inherently bad or immoral. And by immoral, I mean things that are unacceptable and should be unacceptable within humans, within our fellow humans. You said that culture shapes what you find acceptable, and you're at peace with that. And that's fine. If that's your statement, feel free
Well,
to
I
correct.
didn't say I'm at peace with that. Careful,
Okay.
I didn't say I'm at peace with that.
I thought you specifically did. I thought you said that you're at a place where, but go ahead, correct me there, please. So where are you at with that statement?
No, I'm at peace with specific cultural inheritances. I'm not at peace with their contingency. Obviously not. That's actually that's a major source of tension because this means that now there are social developments they need to maintain in order to keep these things that you value, the kind of thing that values, into perpetuity. It's actually a source of great stress. If you want to talk about pragmatics and perverse effects, like one of the issues with with a lot of Christian believers, not all of them, but with a lot of them, is that they take the eternality of the afterlife or whatever to be essentially a license to play fast and loose and reckless with the things of this world.
In what
That's
sense?
actually, well, in the sense that there isn't a particular urgency about addressing time critical issues involving the fate of our ecosystem, say. It's a good example, for the simple reason that, well, the world's going to end anyway, and ultimately what really matters is that we have opportunity to exhibit all of the virtues so that we're judged well at the end of days, that we are saved, and so on and so forth. Like these two things are sort of at odds with each other.
I mean,
For
that's a
example,
broad.
like I mean
Just 1 second there, Sunday. He was trying to cut in, but his mic's cutting out, and just to
oh,
let him have a chance to
all right,
respond.
go on.
Okay, yeah. I mean that. So you just said that the inaction on important issues that are threatening to us
Yes.
is an example of the bad that comes from those who are heavenly minded in various religions, Christianity, Islam. Is that a fair statement?
Sure. It doesn't need to just be Christianity, no.
Okay, so there are so many things wrong with that statement. So what do you mean by bad? So what is bad about that? And I'm going to kick back at you. What do you mean by bad? And the other question is the inaction on important topics, which is a definition you just agreed to. What makes those topics important? And real quick side note here, for just for the record, I believe as a Christian,
Yes.
as stewards of creation, we should take care of creation. I think that's
Yes,
actually
sure.
one of the goods that we should do. But so
But you don't.
maybe
But we
a
don't. We don't. So
sure, maybe we don't. But so you just again, and I addressed this in my opening.
yes.
You first you push back against my use of words like bad and moral and good, and then you said important things go unaddressed, and that's bad.
I don't
Can
think I actually pushed back against your idea of bad, moral, and good. I think I asked for clarification as to what you mean because you layered on additional terms to justify
okay,
making those statements. Yes.
sure. So
So, like
now
for example, so when you say
same question.
morally good, as in absolutely unacceptable,
Mhm.
what do you mean? What do you
I
mean?
mean, I just told you. I think it is something a moral good.
Yes.
You said morally good is something that is absolutely unacceptable. That's not what
Sure.
I think. I think moral good is something that is absolutely acceptable and praiseworthy, and moral bad is
Okay.
something that is absolutely unacceptable within humankind, and we recognize these things. Like I
So
mean,
what does my inability say that something is absolutely bad or absolutely good do for your side of the argument that the world is created? Couldn't the conclusion simply be that the world is not created and they simply don't exist, and that we have habits that maybe sort of defy what we absolutely know, but that we use motivated reasoning to sort of propel. So, for example, like I'll absolutely concede that in the absence of like a metaphysical principle justifying my ideas of good and bad, if somebody else stronger came along and deleted me, then those ideas would simply cease to exist. Now, that's not something I'm at peace with, but like I don't think I'm actually required to be at peace with anything for my reflections upon the world to be valid, or for uh my doubt about there being a metaphysical principle of good or bad being valid either.
I think that's an important part right there where you said that you're not at peace with it. I think that is an important indicator of the idea that there is something more that we are um I want to say created with, but to be fair to your side, we'll just say that we are
No, go with
hardwired.
that. It's fine. It's fine. Don't be a coward. Just
Um
say creative with.
I think I don't think it's cowardly. I'm trying to respect your what terminology that you would accept while not straw manning you. So I think that there's something that we inherently have that makes us not at peace with the idea of saying, hey, anyone's definition of morality is okay. If there comes a time when all of society says that grape is a good thing, or at least is an acceptable thing.
Ryan, are we allowed to say rape? This is kind of silly.
Am I? I don't
It's
know.
kind of it's kind of crass. Stop saying
Well,
grape.
yeah,
It's
let's
weird. Just say, use a different example.
yeah, let's
I-
sorry.
okay, sure. Yeah.
That's right.
I didn't want to get the stream banned. I know words like that can,
Do it. Get it
Um,
banned.
Let's just carry on.
but things like that, atrocities, things that are we would generally agree are inherently immoral and bad. There's something in you that you just said you're not at peace with saying, well,
Inherently, well, inherently, well, you have to got to be careful there, buddy, because inherently isn't just a moral judgment. Inherently is a metaphysical judgment, and if
correct.
I and
And
if I and if I don't follow Kant and regard the moral as that which is absolutely sort of pure imperative without any contingency whatsoever, because the word moral, I don't know if you're familiar with this. Do you know what it means, like historically?
oh, I'm sorry.
Do you know what the
Um,
word do you know what the word moral, like the root of it? Do you know what it means?
no, what's the root?
It refers to custom. So, for example, if you read Aristotle's Ethics, it's often translated as morality, the word ethics. What he's talking about specifically is the types of characters that are developed by different political systems. These are the types of people and the types of virtues that are maximized or minimized or whatever, based on whether or not you have a democracy or a monarchy or a whatever, like those kinds of things.
Yeah,
That
so
that's
we,
what it refers to. So, like for example, like virtue ethics is completely viable, provided even under a Darwinian frame, provided you recognize the cultural contingency of the things that we recognize as virtues. There's no contradiction there. You can be self-aware of the fact that a structure has limited application. It doesn't extend into eternity, say, but still like use it to judge your decisions. We do so all the time with respect to diet. The food that's appropriate to us depends on our health. That's a specific organic structure in the world that's not always going to be there. That's contingent as any moral system. Actually, a lot more so. So I mean, like, there's no I don't know what kind of contradiction you're trying to draw here, but it seems, if I may, I know I've been going a little bit length, but just to wrap up this thought, it seems like you're essentially engaging a little bit of moral blackmail here. You're saying that, well, if if you want to say that there is no God, well, then you don't have a basis for any of the good or bad judgments that you make in the world, and therefore, like, you're basically on the side of the Nazis or something like that. But that doesn't logically follow at all. It's perfectly possible to have motives that are bounded to like to observe that you have particular tendencies, and to observe that certain activities as opposed to other activities have a maximizing relationship to those tendencies as opposed to a minimizing one, and therefore to apply your
I'm sorry,
powers to
wait.
supporting one as opposed to another because
Okay,
it's more interesting to
can
you.
you repeat that part again? I'm
Which
sorry.
which
Repeat what
part?
you the last two sentences you said, please.
Oh, I wish I could, but I'm quite sure I can't remember them.
Ah, okay.
Long story short, like, when you say, like, you keep loading in this word essential, but nothing about this world is essential. Everything in this world is a construction of matter, even you and me. Even if this is not inconsistent with your Bible, which says they were made of dust. So to say that there is an essential right or wrong, you got to be a little bit careful there, because it seems like you're kind of You're cheating a little bit. And you're saying that this thing that we need God to justify, well, our discourse about it therefore implies that it must therefore metaphysically exist, and therefore our discourse about it is also justified by that. You see how circular that is? Like we act as if morality is an actual like principle of the world. It's a thing that exists outside of human culture and so on and so forth. Um, but there's reference within that discourse about morality, this being that sort of grounds it. Therefore, insofar as it self-references this thing, it therefore is evidence for the existence of that thing. But we could just be wrong. It's possible that there are patterns of human behavior that have more longevity than others. And even if they, at some point in their history, reference a certain thing, doesn't mean we aren't licensed to take from it what we
What do you
like
mean
and what
by
we dislike.
patterns in human behavior that reference a certain thing?
Discourses of morality. Like when you're talking about how, when you're specifically leveraging um, my referring to things as good and bad as an argument in favor of a different kind of good and bad than I am discussing. I've been very upfront about the fact that my notions of good and bad are indeed mine, even if they're shared by a lot of people. They're limited, obviously. Um, if you're using that to sort of imply the metaphysical truth of something that is uh, sort of a component of the historical emergence of that discourse, that's kind of arguing in a circle. You're using the effects of an idea to justify the truth of the idea.
So you mentioned good and bad and how using it to point to a metaphysical truth
I
is
should
a
say the use of the idea to justify the use of the idea. Sorry, as
um,
you were.
so you said the use of the ideas of good and bad to define or point to a metaphysical truth is in your book a problem or circular reasoning.
The use of this language? No. What you're trying to do though is say that if I regard, for example, the rape of Nanking as bad, forgive me, um,
Going back
then
to it.
then there then therefore um I'm in some sense tacitly assenting to the existence of a metaphysical principle justifying that in all cases. But I've been very upfront about the fact that when I say good or bad, I mean that within how I intellectually conceive these things, I rank this thing as an undesirable, a very strong undesirable, and it's I don't know what the opposite would be, but like the opposite, it's non-existence as desirable. That doesn't commit me, even if historically or even if conceptually, that requires to be absolutely coherent the existence of God. That doesn't actually necessitate that I follow through on that all the way. I can be inconsistent.
You
That's
can
not an
be.
argument in your
That's
favor. That's
true.
just an
I mean,
argument
I think
against that's just an argument against the consistency of moral behavior.
well, that might be your best quote of the night there. So I'll congratulate you on that. You can be inconsistent, and that's fair, but at least acknowledging that you are inconsistent, I think, is a point in the favor of and
Oh,
a
I
piece
didn't acknowledge that. I just said I could be.
towards okay, okay. At least I'd say that's step one towards that piece in the puzzle of another thing that points to an ultimate source of morality, which is what this whole question is about. So a few things that you mentioned. You mentioned that I basically implied that you are essentially on the side of the Nazis if you don't believe in moral absolutes. That's not what I said. Actually, what I believe is a little bit more nuanced than that. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. And it's this. It's that you can very well not be on the side of the Nazis if you don't believe in moral absolutes. What you can't do is justify
I feel that
why
example's going to bite me in the ass.
you can't do is justify why you are not on the side of the Nazis, or at least why the side of the Nazis is bad. That is what you can't do. So you can absolutely stand against
Well,
them.
sure I can. Sure I
This
can
is
with
the
conditions, right?
same argument like I've seen many atheists accuse Christians, and granted, some Christians are not very good about defining their terms here, but accuse Christians of saying,
Apparently.
well, Christians think that atheists can't be good people or can't believe in good things and against bad things, bad actions. No, that's not what Christians believe. Christians believe that you very well can, you just can't define why you do or justify and ground why you believe or even prefer those things. Moving on, you noted that morality comes from a word more akin to customs. That's fine. I can grant that, and my point still stands, which is that we have customs. Customs are erected preferences that have come out of culture. And my question is, why do those preferences speak to things in a way that seems absolute? And I won't use the word we don't like anymore, so I'll say murder. Why is murder almost universally treated as a bad thing?
Well, do you suppose it couldn't be because you're raised in cultures that have those things instantiated already, so they are more absolute than you are already? You're raised with these ideas from childhood, dude. I mean, even biblical law, for example, they don't make metaphysical art appeals to the existence of God to justify the Ten Commandments. You're just taught them in Sunday school. The philosophical arguments come much later.
Am I correct in, I don't want to misrepresent you here. You're saying belief against atrocities like the word we can't say, like murder, like
Yeah.
dominating
I
and
think we're
enslaving.
past our YouTube swear jar point, but sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
Right.
thanks.
Like belief that those things are bad come from the way that you were raised, and that's your explanation?
Well, of course they do. From where did you get the commandments from God, my dude?
You think that, or am I correct in saying then that the next logical step would be if you were raised and nourished by soulless robots who didn't talk on a deserted island, and then you came to society and you saw a man get stabbed to death and robbed and kicked in the head until he was dead,
Yes.
you wouldn't think that was wrong? That is that a belief that follows?
There are humans in this world who have that exact reaction. They have not been raised among soulless robots, my friend.
So,
That
just cut in here, just because we have been talking a lot about concepts of morality with creation. We have been going for quite a while.
And I gotta pee.
Oh, well, yes. Take advantage of this moment then, President Sunday, and go
Brilliant,
have
thank you.
yourself some time to yourself. And I'll remind everybody that we will move into Q&A shortly. But, well, Luke, while I have you here, were there any other talking points that you wanted to move into? Because, like I said, it seems like we really honed in on this one surrounding morality. But if you had other talking points we wanted to get down to before Q&A, that might generate some discussion. And I'll also remind everybody in our live chat, smack the like button, get your super chats in if you do have questions regarding the topic of the debate, which is creationism on trial. So, yeah, Luke, back to my question there. How you feeling?
Sure. Sorry, I was just texting my wife an update real quick. I do have a hard out here. I should probably get out by 10 if we can try for that. But yeah, I would just say I don't want to say too much that would require a response because that's not really fair while he's gone. But I would point out
Well,
in the beginning.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say if you want to bring up those points now. I just meant like when he gets back, did you want to bounce any other ideas? But
No, that's fair. I mean, and he's been after deferring his opening statement. I think we've made up for that. I'll just say that. But he noteworthily did not interact with the lion's share of the arguments that I made.
well,
So I'm
now you're not waiting for him to be back. You just said you did not interact with the lion's share of arguments that he presented just as he put his headphones in, right? You can't do that just as you
Hello,
come
how are we
back.
all?
I'm just picking. We're doing great. We're just about to jump into Q&A. I think Luke was basically saying there that this is probably where we should move in now. So thanks everybody for contributing, and we'll get into it. Do do do
You
do
want to know
do.
the punchline of all this, Luke?
sorry.
You want to know the punchline of all this?
What's the punchline? Give
You
it to
didn't
me.
really pay you didn't really pay attention to my opening statement. Um, I am Christian. I have a lot of philosophical problems with your stance. I actually come from a similar situation as you, and I feel like I'm paying some kind of penance for the arrogant way I've treated other atheists in the past. So, dear God.
I wouldn't agree that that is a punchline because you could be a Christian who has a very poorly formed worldview. That happens all.
I actually have a very carefully formed worldview. I've spent a lot of time dealing
And
with.
you could believe that
I've
and still
I've I've I've
after
considered things
that.
that you haven't,
So
and I'm less insecure. I don't require my entire opening statement, for example, to be arguing that, well, all these bad people, they have all these negative attitudes towards my position. Let me tell you why
Never
it's
remember
just
saying that.
as good.
We could
I saw
roll
your
back.
T-jump debate, dude. It was kind of
I don't
spot on.
require my closing statement to be ad homs and straw men's that my opponent
That's
never
not
said.
that's not an ad hom. I'm just psychoanalyzing you.
All right,
I
so
think it's
Yeah.
that.
just before we jump into Q&A, I do apologize just because originally we did have this booked as an atheist versus creation debate, and I had put that as your tag under there. I'm just going
Yeah,
to,
You're
and
exposed.
that's kind of a problem, my dude.
yeah.
Because
You're
the
exposed
conversation can
now.
literally never evolve. It's guaranteeing virtually that every single debate is a clown show.
So
That's embarrassing.
would you prefer that
It's
I
it's 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 insisting that even James, who claims to be a Christian, baffles me despite running a freak show. Like it puts you guys in the position of literally maximizing the possibility of the worst voices possible getting the biggest megaphone. It's deplorable, bluntly.
well, I just updated you to
Present
non.
company not implicated there. My apologies.
I understand, but yeah, I did update you to non-creation. Just my apologies there, just because that's how it.
No, go
originally
with
is.
atheist. It's fine.
Oh,
Fine by me.
oh, you trying to throw me through a loop for no reason?
I
All right.
am. I am.
All right.
I'm sorry, Ryan. I owe you after this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. I'll be in your DMs later. It's fine. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm pretty chill. Everybody knows that I like
Ryan's
hanging out.
great. I like Ryan.
Thanks, buddy. I like you a lot too. I think that this has been a great discussion. So once again, I see that a lot of you could vote in our poll. So why don't you take those tap and thumbs fingers and bring them over to our like button and see if you can give that a tickle. So Joshua Jamie says, "How do we know a universe could exist in any other way than to have life on a knife's edge?"
Not sure who
That
that's.
laugh. Oh, sorry.
I'm
That's for
not
my
even
apologies.
sure exactly what. Can we get clarification on who that's for?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Let me just check some of their other questions. I'm going to move on. I'm going to check some of
That's a
the.
really cool question, though. I just want to know who it's addressed to first.
Yeah, let me see what some of their other questions are, and I'll get a feel for this super chatter. Sean666 says, "Why would an super intelligent God have errors in human DNA and make unintelligent animals like primates? Isn't your creator supposed to be a master at human genetics?"
I think that was
Well,
for me.
Yeah.
sin has corrupted us.
Okay. So the first part of the question would be, why would he do that? That's my simple answer there is that that's irrelevant to the topic. The question is whether or not he did. It's not why did he do it. We can talk about the whys all we want, and those are all 100% speculation as they are when we're talking about other people. Why did I come here tonight? Why did President Sunday come here tonight? Anyone other than me or President Sunday can't give an answer to that. But the other part is that if you are going with a Christian worldview, which I do, I won't claim that since I'm representing the theist worldview, but I'll answer from my Christian perspective. It's that we live in a fallen world, we live in a fallen reality, and bad things, including sickness and genetic degradation, happen.
Well, I mean, first of all, point of information. Immediately following original sin, after which Adam and Eve had already, uh, self-reliantly sewed together clothes of leaves. God provided some clothes of animal skins. It doesn't appear as if there is any process of sinful degeneration leading up to the violence done to animals and so on and so forth. There is sort of a conjectured period in which these animals that have been equipped with organs specifically meant for ripping and tearing the flesh of other animals apparently lay down peacefully beside them and all was well. It's I mean fundamentally like when you're dealing with an approach to questions of like the origins of how things are and you have endless reference to a a a a tale that simply asserts that at one point this wasn't the case and therefore it wasn't. I mean, there's just you can just say whatever you want at that point. It's like, well, why does the Earth appear to be older than the chronology? I'm not saying he's a young Earth creationist, but why does the Earth appear to be older than the chronology given in the Bible? Well, when God left this world, it maybe took on the form of a godless world or something like that after the fact. Like whatever. It's like, yeah, plausible. Not particularly compelling, which is kind of what we're looking for. There's a million things that could be plausible that aren't very compelling. But that's when you want that particular explanation to fly, like you'll make it fly.
Any other thoughts to Luke before we move on?
For someone who accused me of gish galloping, that was a good gish gallop ramble. Not
I was
much to
answering I was answering a question. I wasn't really
not much that's substantive there to interact with. But yeah,
All right.
I think we're
So that first one from Joshua Jamie, it seems most of his questions are pointed at you there, Luke. So how do we know a universe could exist any other way than to have life on a knife's edge? So that one is for you, Luke.
oh, can you read it one more time, please?
Oh, yeah, let me just flick on back here. How do we know a universe could exist any other way than to have life on a knife's edge?
Oh, okay. Okay. I think this is a question about my fine tuning presentation for which was one of the first legs of the supporting evidences for a creator or creators. And so his question is, how do we know that there is any that a universe could exist any other way than on a knife's edge? We don't. I think that kind of plays into the argument, which is that if there is only one way for it to exist and all of the necessary presets are exactly right simultaneously for it to exist, that is a good piece of evidence for an intentional compilation of those pieces.
Okay.
That's what I say.
Any thoughts on that question there? Response, President Sunday?
Yeah. So this type of design argument sort of hinges around the fact that there's apparently a lot of consensus around this, that
I'll be right
cosmic
back.
conditions, the cosmic conditions that permit life in our universe are very, very, very small. Um, but to move from that to assert the existence of a God sort of presumes something about the total range of possible universe, let's say arrangements uh, that could have something that we would call akin to life, or could have something that maybe we would value similarly to life, or that something like God would value similarly to life. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, when you look at like the specificity of and I'm not familiar with these, I'm not a physicist. When you look at the specificity of the conditions under which the universe apparently will collapse if they are deviated from even just a tiny little bit, then it seems like, well, this is so specific. Why not any one of these other numbers in the absence of anything that seems to definitively decide which of these is which, that that we can be aware of and understand? Well, it seems like there must be something outside of it to sort of pick that. And when we think of like, well, what what kind of thing would prefer life? Well, we think something that's sort of like life. We think of like God or something or whatever. But that's presuming that the actual range of possible universes that have a thing about which we would make that kind of inference is very, very small. But the fact of the matter is we're kind of in the dark about how many of those there are. Like we flat out don't know. It's distinctly likely that there are potentially like very, very many types of universes that could support life or something like life or what have you.
All
Um,
right.
and so it's just kind of, we just don't know. It's question begging.
All right. I'm going to close the poll here, and then we'll continue with the super chat. So, is creationism true? 60% voted no, 31% of you voted yes, and 8% voted unsure. So, close that out, everybody, and I'll start a new fun one for you guys to interact with when we finish up our super chats. All right. So, Joshua Jamie asks again for you to hear, Luke, hurricanes killing children points to an intelligent designer. If you don't know why this happens, you can't say it's intelligent.
Um, I don't think I ever said that hurricanes killing children point to an intelligent designer. But I think that they can be explained within the framework of an intelligent designer or designers. And I'll tell you the Christian worldview. Again, I know that I'm not representing exclusively Christians tonight, but the worldview that I hold and that I know best would simply assert that an all-knowing, all-powerful God is by definition going to have a much broader purview than you do. And so if we're talking about something like the ultimate good or the greatest amount of possible good, which seems like this question is alluding to it in why would we justify things like hurricanes killing kids? The Christian answer would be that your observation and your ability to judge that situation is immensely more limited than a creator God or gods would be. And then you couple that with the belief that we live in a fallen universe, and you come to a pretty similar situation to hurricanes killing kids and diseases killing people who don't seem to deserve it.
May I reply to that?
Yeah, we should have time. We only got a few super chats to go through. So
Well,
go
I think this is one of the more interesting ones. So this sort of argument from evil type of argument against the existence of God is not uh, particularly compelling for the simple reason that it's very easy to imagine myriad different reasons that God could have for permitting certain types of bad things in the world, despite apparently having like a good nature, et cetera, et cetera. I think one of the things that type of argument really gets at, though, is in a specifically Christian conception of God, there is this assumption that God is motivated out of love for his creaturely creations. And it seems that allowing large numbers of them to wantonly die in advance of having any particular chance. Conjecturally, maybe Luke wants to insist that literally every single person who has died in these cases is either, under the age of being morally culpable, or has in fact encountered a missionary somewhere and has had the opportunity to accept Christ or reject him, or so on and so forth. That doesn't seem to be something that we have an easy time reconciling with the idea of love. We tend to associate love with putting, in fact, this is actually a biblical statement. We tend to associate the idea of love with putting the well-being of some other thing or person even above ourselves, to the point that we will be willing to sacrifice ourselves for that thing or person. That's what God identifies as love. Um,
okay.
when we're talking about, like, well, if God is so identified with love, we will literally say in the context of Scripture that God is love. Well, why is a loving God supposedly perfectly comfortable with the wholesale destruction of children to whom the kingdom of heaven belongs to, such, right? It seems to run a contradiction. It's not like there aren't ways to possibly square that logically, but it's a hard sell.
Can I jump in here with a last thought on this?
Yeah, this is your question, so last thought there.
I was going to say, are we doing the whoever it was addressed to has the last word thing? Okay.
As long as you got time.
Yeah, real quick. In response to Prez and to the asker, I think what we have to actually fundamentally understand here is that we're really drawing an arbitrary line based on our personal preferences of what's acceptable. And here's an example I'd give. When we come to pain and suffering and loss, that line is very arbitrary, and it changes person to person. Because if you're walking through your living room and you stub your toe, that's pain. That's a level of suffering. That hurts. That's not pleasant. That's a bad thing. You stub your toe and you bend down to look at your toe. Ouch. And just then a car crashes and a piece of shrapnel flies through the window, and you see that, oh my gosh, by stubbing my toe and bending down, I missed that piece of shrapnel that otherwise would have taken my head off. Actually, now I'm thankful for that pain. I'm thankful for that stub toe. We can all understand that. We can all accept that conceptually. But then we say, okay, so might there be a source of good, a source of shrapnel, if you will, and from an analogy, that does justify kids dying in hurricanes? Because we can arbitrarily define, okay, the stub toe is okay. We're okay with that. But then when we get to the hurricanes, we're like, we drew the line somewhere. We don't quite know where, but somewhere it wasn't acceptable. That's what I'd say. And I think that we need to expand our understanding of how much more God sees and understands than us.
Can I retort to that very quickly?
Luke, if it's all right with you.
Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
Cool. All right.
If God's understanding of what love is so alien to human beings that it can both be it's so high a property of his being that he is identified with it directly in Scripture, and yet can delete wholesale in a brutal, miserable fashion, body and soul, the entire masses of people, including innocent people and a whole host of animals that haven't done anything wrong either, then I feel like the language of love in that case, and of good and evil generally, is so divorced from anything that human beings would have a conception of, that it is misleading, if not to say like a total deception, to describe God in those terms if we're going to assert that he exists and hold those two thoughts simultaneously.
All right. Any closing thoughts there, Luke, or do you want to carry right on?
If you want an example of someone appealing to things that they have no right to appeal to, Rewatch that answer. There's an appeal to absolutes and an appeal to an absolute definition of love and what love should look like without any right presented for him to hold or apply that standard.
All right, we're
You
moving
confuse a
on.
reference with an appeal, but okay.
All right. Medical Mass Media says, Demonstride says go to discord.gg/Demonstride to have more religious debates. Thank you for that. Making me read your your advert there. I'll also remind people, now that you reminded me, that a lot of the people that are hanging out moderating the live chat are also hanging out over in our Modern Day Debate Discord, where we have tons of Discord chat rooms. So yeah, definitely check that out. Joshua Jamie comes in again. Luke, at what point in the formation of the universe do we think the choice had to be made rather than a naturally occurring event unfolding?
The choice. Can you read that again, please?
Yeah. Luke, at what point in the formation of the universe do you think a choice had to be made rather than a naturally occurring event unfolding?
A choice. I'm assuming he's alluding to the choice of a creator or creators to make that universe. I think that's what he is alluding to, in which case the choice would predate any of the existence of that universe. And it would predate it in a sense that is beyond our understanding, because predate directly implies that time has to be put into motion, but it would be put into motion by an entity or entities that are not restricted by and are outside of and in complete control of the passage and even very existence of time. So, I mean, at what point kind of like assumes that I point to a time scale when I'm saying there wasn't one. But it would be before the existence.
Yeah, so it's fundamentally incoherent because you're asserting a relationship between action and agency that presumes things that are common to how we understand agency and action in the world, but that requires time. The very notion of action, it directly implies some sense of duration because there's going to be some movement between states. Now, whether or not this is experienced in the sense of there being like an eternally changing instant in which you have the memory of things past and the intellectualization of things forward is sort of immaterial, because already you have an idea of a timeless God, also scripturally a changeless God, but my opponent hasn't actually asserted that tonight, occupying different states. And so the question of, well, how does he move from one state to the other outside of time? Well, you really can't, because that's what time essentially is when we're discussing time. We're talking about the track along which a thing moves. So if the question is sort of getting at what I was getting at with my opening statement, it's like, at what point would a decision have to be made? Well, at a point at which no points are possible. It's kind of a conversation stopper, because what you're kind of pointing to is like the absurdity of God is being used as sort of a cover for referring all justifications to his mystery. But I mean, then what on earth are we even arguing about? You have no basis for justifying any of these conditions except for the bare fact of it's too crazy for us to know. That's not very compelling. It's just not.
Final word over there, Luke.
Yeah, I don't think that saying it's too crazy for us to know is exactly the way I'd put it. But I think that saying that there are some things beyond our knowledge that are necessary, whether you're going to say it's a god, gods, or that the universe came out of nothing, which some atheists do believe. I've watched debates where atheists posit that as a solution to the problem of origins. Either way, you have to say there is something beyond our knowledge that we don't understand, because we don't understand how time, space, matter, energy could come out of nothing, whether it's from something intelligent or not. So you're kind of setting up this false
But we do know God moves between those, right?
Where we have an issue that is acknowledged as the issue to be solved, but you're trying to make that issue unique to one side. And I think that's a bit disingenuous for you.
How so? I don't think it's particularly unique to either side if they're making similar scale assertions. But I'm not making an assertion about the emergence of time or the emergence of the universe. I'm simply giving you problems that I'm having with your particular description of the way in which it must come about. And one of the things that I'm pointing to is that the descriptions that you've been giving throughout the course of this debate have been things that all imply a familiarity with terms that are only things that make sense within the context of a universe already extant. So you're arguing in a circle. You're arguing from the principles that we observe in the universe to something which is entirely alien and outside of it, sort of necessity, because God has properties that the universe doesn't have, and vice versa.
All right. Any last
Don't-
thoughts there? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't think you could say and vice versa. I don't think that would be true. That all the universe's properties that it has are within the control of God.
I mean,
So
vice versa sort of follows logically, no? If they don't share properties, then they don't share properties.
I'm saying I don't think the universe has properties that God doesn't share. They are all within God. They are all controlled by God, and thus they are his. They are parts of what he controls, and they are from him. So they're not separate.
But the universe is created by God, yes?
And then
But the universe is created by God, yes?
that you seem to be
We'll give him the
you're
last
kind of
word here.
pointing at an issue with my worldview, and I'm saying to call it even an issue.
If you can't ask that question, you categorically lost the
I'm
debate.
saying that
But the universe was created by God, right?
call it an issue with my worldview
Yeah, he
is
doesn't. He just can't answer that.
misleading
It's over.
at best, when it is an issue with the entire discussion of origins, regardless of what your belief about origins is. It is the issue that origins seek to solve. So it's not an issue with my belief. It is the issue that this belief seeks to address, as well as every other belief about origins.
Important question, or else I'm just going to dump the call because it's actually really critical to this. Luke, was the universe created by God?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Was the universe created by God?
Yes.
Okay, so the universe is a property that God doesn't have because God wasn't created, right?
Universe is created within God. So if it is
But
entirely
the universe has a property that God doesn't have. God is
It is
created.
a piece
Sorry,
of his
God is
property.
not created. The universe is. Yes. So
I'm sorry.
they have different properties from each other. That's a categorical distinction. You can't be both created and not created.
All right. Did
I'm
you want to
gonna
move on
say-
to the next question, or did you want to engage with that there?
Sorry, it's lagging real bad. What did you say, Ryan?
Oh, I asked if you wanted to carry on with the other questions, or if you wanted to engage with that further.
Yeah, sure. I don't. Yeah, I don't think there's really much there to engage with.
Okay. All right. Medical mass media says I meant to say more religion debates. Sue me. So that's at. I'm sorry if I messed up your pitch there, and you did pay for it. So they asked you to go to discord.gg/demonstride. Let's see here. Joshua Jamie, thank you so much for the interactions here, helping the conversation keep going. And I also will say sorry, President Sunday, that we haven't had more questions for you. Our audience is very interested to unpack here with you here, Luke. So
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. They can just subscribe to President Sunday if they want to ask me those directly.
yes, social animals need. Oh, sorry, this is the question. Social animals need rules for how to treat one another. So the ones that were able to understand emotions of others are better, or of others better, were able to pass on their genes the most. A built-in morality. Sorry, I'm trying to cadence that properly, but.
So I'm sorry. Is this the claim is social animals need to understand one another, and the ones that developed that ability passed on their genes the most? And this is an argument for some kind of built-in morality?
That is, yeah, I think that's a summary of what they're asking.
Yeah, no, it's not. Because there comes a point when in a very utilitarian way, that built-in morality is no longer functionally beneficial. And I think that the example I gave about a first world country using the resources better, using the manpower better, passing on stronger, healthier genes, that is an example that you can't make the argument that that questioner just made about, because actually the better use there from a utilitarian built-in morality perspective is for the stronger, more prosperous, healthier group to take what they need to further their prosperity and health and strength. So no, that's not a built-in morality. Actually, it's the opposite of of that, and it would lead to many things that many of us find immoral, even though they would be beneficial from a utilitarian survival-based perspective.
Okay, so that's what the questioner has described is a possible argument for judging some moral systems or some like systems of behaviors or whatever to be better than others along a specific track. But this isn't going to track directly alongside morality, so it doesn't really get at the heart of the question. That being said, the comparison to, well, this might lead us to value things that we currently in our present form don't consider moral or the reverse of the spectrum, things we consider immoral. That's sort of irrelevant because the what has not been actually established in this argument is that our moral conceptions and feelings and attitudes aren't engendered via a historical process of a series of accidents. Such and such happened, this caused this cultural set of behaviors to outsurvive others or to become predominant, and therefore we are raised with these conceptions from early on. We are conditioned by them to like this and hate this and so on and so forth. The question doesn't really get at the question of morality, but I think the response is equally inadequate.
All right, last word there, Luke, before our last super chat as so far.
Yeah, I mean, the limitations that President Sunday put on that system that was proposed by the questioner to properly address morality and the existence of morality and our preferences for morality, and the words like judging some practices, that is inadequate. And those words are doing a lot of heavy lifting there, because there are many practices that don't fall into those some that wouldn't be explained or justified by what the questioner proposed.
All right, same questioner coming in. Joshua Jamie asks, I knew you would say only God knows if it's good. So how can you say it's good for hurricanes to kill children? How do you know your God is good if he's the only one that knows if he's good?
Snap.
I don't think I said only God would know if it is good. Actually, I would challenge anyone to go ahead and drop that quote in the live stream there, because I didn't say it. However, I think that we can know what is good and bad because we are created in God's image. We can't know it to the extent that he does because he has, and we understand this. This is not a difficult concept. When a child who knows things that are good or bad in a limited sense doesn't understand as much as their 60-year-old grandparent who knows more, has more data inputs into their mind, has more knowledge, has more experience, they can make a better and more widespread judgment about good and bad. But that doesn't mean that the child can't know anything that's good and bad, or can't even authoritatively state that, hey, when I saw that man get shot in the head yesterday, I'm only 8 years old, but I knew that that was bad. So no, I didn't say that, and it's a question based on a misquote and a misunderstanding.
Okay,
Um,
if you want a minute there to respond.
yeah. So, what the question really gets at is, um, Luke seems to be asserting that even before we have any exposure to language or customs or to other people, we have ingrained within us a specific set of behaviors. I'm sort of in the dark about that with respect to things that we consider in the domain of morality. But I would wonder how on earth the hell he knows that. What experiment has been done to demonstrate that a child, for example, raised on a desert, not raised, but left alone to grow up to adulthood on a desert island, would therefore, upon being exposed and having made legible somehow without any sort of acculturation, um, to some act of murder, say what we would identify as murder, that they would have the same or something akin to the same moral response as someone who's been raised within a family, within a given culture, in a certain time and place. Like that just doesn't. I don't know how on earth you can say that with a straight face, as if you have any way whatsoever of knowing the truth of that statement.
All right, 1 minute on the floor, and then we'll move. Actually, we got one last super chat, so we'll try to keep it to a minute response there, Luke, to close.
I'm not
that
in a rush.
question.
Yeah, so I mean, what he just claimed is just patently false. I mean, we can observe things within various cultures which historically, before the advent of modern technology, had no contact with each other, and which had very similar foundational level morals. Things like that murder is wrong. These are cultures that, for all intents and purposes,
Yeah, they're cultures. I said not acculturated, right? Before
were
language.
raised on deserted islands with no communication to one another, and yet they came up with very similar standards of intrinsic things that we recognize as right and wrong. And then he mentioned that that I believe that we would have preset behaviors. I don't think I said that. Again, that's a misquote. I think a closer idea that I might have shared is that we would have preset beliefs.
We'll give them more time. We're too complicated to do in 5 seconds.
Well,
standard can be the ability to recognize right and wrong in a moral sense. That is what would come preset in all humans.
And I will apologize, President. While you were getting a drink, Luke did ask to be out. Well, I've kept him 5 minutes over his asking time, so.
I don't blame him.
Well, we do have 2 more coming in here, so if it's all right, I'll set a 1-minute timer. Are you all right with responses, Luke, if they're just for you, or do you want to just bang through them?
Yeah, we can probably do like 2 more. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm sorry for keeping you over, Tom, but thank you so much. So, yeah, sorry if I didn't tell you that, President, if you were wondering why I was pushing things
It's all
off
good.
there.
No worries.
You said, so Joshua Jamie comes in again, says, you said God is the only one that knows if it's good for hurricanes to kill children. So they're saying that they're quoting you.
Yeah, I think that the former claim was that I said God is the only one who can know what's good. That's not the same thing. I understand that you and possibly my interlocutor here might like to twist and misuse quotes or change little details so that they better fit your argument, but that doesn't make that what I said. So if God is and I'll go back to the analogy I said, right, that I shared. The child who can understand some good and some bad, and the 60-year-old grandparent who has a lot more data, a lot more experience to reference, they can understand more. So in this case, God would be the person who has a much wider base of knowledge and can judge whether or not a hurricane is good or bad. You, as the child in this analogy, probably can't. Maybe some people have enough knowledge that they can. I doubt it. So that would be more in line with my quote. And I just encourage you to be careful to actually argue reality and not what you wish I said.
All right, 1-minute response there, President Sunday, if you have anything.
Nah, it's all good. Let's move to the next one.
Okay. All right, last one coming in, and thank you everybody for the super chats. Thanks to all of our mods hanging out in the chat room there, and everybody kept it really civil in the chat room tonight and on point. So thank you to our viewers as well. Byte GPT says, "Do you guys believe in higher dimensions that exist simultaneously that we can't see, similar to how we can't hear high frequency sounds or see infrared? What do you guys think those realities are like?" Ooh,
Sunday can go first. I've had a lot of questions, so feel free to take
No,
this.
be my guest. You first.
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, that necessitates that I believe in other dimensions, and I think it would be fair to call them higher dimensions. That's not perhaps exactly how I would state it if I were just formulating the statement myself, but if you want to call them higher dimensions that are simultaneously coexisting with us and with each other, yeah, I mean that is a foundational belief in Christendom. So yes, I do believe that.
Well, I disagree with that one. The idea that there are higher dimensions, that's a very specific metaphysical conception of the world. I'd like to see a justification for that doesn't just rely upon the analogy between how we discuss different dimensions and sort of relations of higher and lower in Christian scriptural texts. God is described, despite in Job sort of laying down the measure of the world, he's described as hovering over the surface of the waters, a specific spatial relationship. He's described as flying into the air in the New Testament after he ascends. He comes down on a white horse and so on and so forth. Like there's definitely a compatibility there if you take a lot of literary license with the language of scripture, but I think that's a wild claim to say that this is an essential part of how Christians view the world. I think it's something you can make Christian language amenable to with a lot of stretching, but I think I would need to see some kind of argument there besides some sort of like poetic compatibility.
All right. Thank you to both of our speakers. Joshua Jamie has one last question. We'll just keep it to 15 seconds for the interest of getting to our closing statements for respect for our speaker who has to be out of the room. It is good for hurricanes to kill children. 15 seconds. Because we have entertained it a bit.
That's unfair.
All right, 30 seconds.
No, I mean the question's unfair. 15 seconds. Screw them.
Okay.
So there can be a good, an ultimate good that comes out of it. That doesn't mean that it is good in and of itself. Just like I said with the stub toe, if the stub toe is all you have, it hurts. It's pain. It's a level of suffering, a low level, but a level nonetheless. But is there an ultimate good that came out of that stub toe when you bent down to look at it and your head didn't get taken off by the piece of shrapnel from the car crash? Yes, there is an ultimate good. So an oversimplified concept, but yeah, you could say that there is an ultimate good. I would just throw that extra word in there, and that extra word matters when we're talking about definitions.
All right, that was our last super chat. So I'm going to close the last poll that I had put up there, which was who made the most compelling arguments tonight. So we had 66% for President Sunday and 32% for 33, sorry, percent for Luke Edison. So yeah, we're gonna.
Where is your God now?
We're gonna close it out. I think
Apparently he's your God too, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know. He so ordered the universe that the entire history of causality led to this moment when the theist was roundly defeated in the marketplace of ideas.
See how
Praise
I
the Lord.
stirred the pot right at the end
An
there.
appeal to masses, which is notoriously reliable, right?
Hey, my dude, Christianity conquered the entire globe, and yet here we are.
Did it?
It defeated itself. Ah.
All right. So yeah, let's close it out there, guys. But yeah, I realized as I closed the poll that I was kind of stirring the pot, and that's always fun. So once again, everybody, hit the like whether you're watching this here or elsewhere, and yeah, definitely check out our speakers who are going to be linked in the description if you want to hear more from them. And yeah, cheers, everybody. We'll see you in a couple days.
Godspeed. Arrivederci.
No matter what you think of me, it's only half of what I am. I'm the greatest house free to say, and I won't give a damn. I expect complete conformity, or I'll cast you aside. I spit upon your decency and swallow up your pride. Everything to you, hear my call out to war. The fake news says now I'm a